just quickly give us a rundown of what mitochondria actually is?
Sure. So these are ancient bacteria, evolutionary. They integrated with our cellular machinery.
Yeah, excellent. So basically, bacteria that are batteries in our cells.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Anurag Singh. A leading expert in longevity and mitochondrial health, he shares the latest science on aging and performance.
The foods we are eating contributes to the stress of mitochondria as we age. The second is the
Mitochondrial function is estimated to decline by up to 50% by the time we reach 70.
And I wanted to really study what was the central hallmark that was causing the huge difference in muscle strength and frail. And two pathways emerged. It was really
interesting. What happens at a cellular level when mitochondria aren't functioning properly?
The first thing you would see in somebody where you would suspect mitochondrial dysfunction is they would just be fatigued.
Cyanide instantly kills our mitochondria, which is why people drop dead almost immediately.
If you actually look inside a cell, these are not one, there are thousands of them, and they're like a grid. Taking a certain class of drugs like cyanide will just short circuit every thousands of mitochondria at the same time.
So what can someone actually do about improving mitochondrial health?
I would say...
Dr. Singh, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Great pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation today because we're going to dive into, areas of mitochondrial health and how to support your energy and longevity and a specific compound that I've been taking now for blooming years. So it's going to be really exciting to learn firsthand about all of this. So you've been into cellular health and reversing aging for quite some time, and I would say longevity medicine, and all about the mitochondria, which are, I guess, in very layman's terms, the batteries of our cells. How do you think that they linked to healthy aging?
Yeah, so you may have heard, most longevity scientists talk about these 12 hallmarks of aging. These are different biological pathways that sort of intersect between each other and that contribute to how we age. I think mitochondria is the centerpiece of it that can be linked to all of them, but it's probably the one that is most amenable to intervention and sort of, delaying aging and having a healthy health span.
So what do you think causes mitochondrial dysfunction? Because, some age-related conditions have up to 80% linked to mitochondrial dysfunction. What do you think causes this dysfunction with our mitochondria?
Yeah, so, this is 20 years of research, plus there's been many others that have been studying this. I think there's sort of the diet, the foods we are eating contributes to the stress of mitochondria as we age. The second is the physical activity. I mean, I always say exercise is the best anti-aging or longevity medicine out there. A lot of folks are sedentary. A lot of folks are not eating fresh fruits, and those two are the biggest stressors in mitochondria. And the third would be our lifestyle, our sleep patterns. A lot of medicines like statins and steroids are very stressful to the mitochondria. So all those encompassing contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Just something I want to throw in from my history, and I'd love your opinion on this actually, is that I heard that ciprofloxacin, I love your immediate nod. I had ciprofloxacin for quite some time for a prostate infection of all things about 10 years ago. And I never had energy problems or chronic fatigue or any of these things before I actually had this ciprofloxacin. And after researching it back in, 10, 12 years ago, there really wasn't a lot online about mitochondria at the time, like public knowledge like there is now from people such as yourself. And I heard that ciprofloxacin actually kills mitochondria. Have you heard anything about this direct link? Because obviously there's one about aging and losing mitochondria or their function of them, but there's also one of killing it with antibiotics such as Cipro, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's even a sort of a community, the folks who follow the research we do, and they call themselves the Floxies because their mitochondria they believe. And there is science around it that taking a certain class of antibiotics can have damage effects on mitochondrial DNA and mitochondrial architecture. And so I think there's certainly evidence on those lines.
Can you just quickly give us a rundown of what mitochondria actually is?
Sure. So these are ancient bacteria, evolutionary. They integrated with our cellular machinery, and sort of in a symbiotic relationship. That we as hosts are eating these nutrients, and these powerhouses, these batteries, as you mentioned, are harnessing these nutrients and releasing the energy that is useful for us, the human host, to go about doing everything we do in a day.
Yeah, excellent. So basically, bacteria that are batteries in our cells, so ciprofloxacin supposedly, kills that bacteria. And I think this is probably why, for me personally, why I felt this energy deficit for so long and why I've been so personally focused on mitochondrial health, utilizing certain supplements along the way. So another one that I've been taking as a result has been pregnenolone for quite some time, just a small dose, which has supported my adrenals, but doesn't necessarily support mitochondria in the same way as some of the other things that we'll cover today. So mitochondrial function is estimated to decline by up to 50% by the time we reach 70. What have you seen change in health, energy, and conditions that made you realize it all starts with the mitochondria?
Yeah, it's a study I ran long back in older people in a Dutch population. And Dutch, are very fit people. They're always cycling everywhere, right? So I was looking at 75-year-old Dutch people who had basically trained for half and full marathons all their adult life and were still training for it. And I compared them to age-matched 75-year-olds who thought they were weak, they thought they were frail, and they had a sedentary lifestyle going. And at that point, I wanted to really study what was the central hallmark that was causing the huge difference in muscle strength and frail sort of spectrum. And two pathways emerged when we did biopsies, when we did blood work. It was really inflammation. So the people who were inactive sedentary had much more inflammation going on. And the second was mitochondrial dysfunction. That really kind of triggered all the interest in this mitochondrial area.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it really is a fascinating topic. I mean, it comes down to cellular health, doesn't it? And energy production in terms of pretty much everything that goes on in the body traces back to these two areas, cellular health and mitochondria, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I recorded with Dr. Kate Shanahan yesterday and how she's talking about massive inflammation from seed oils and how, it caused massive oxidation in the body and makes us use up our own antioxidants as well, which causes even more inflammation, which is obviously very damaging to our cells and our mitochondria. So it's interesting how, what we're talking about now ties in with that as a massive cause towards, negative mitochondrial function, I guess. So mitochondrial dysfunction has been linked to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, obesity, all very similar things actually to that which apparently seed oils causes as well. How is it all connected, and what else do you think is responsible for it?
Yeah, so I mean, we have, of course, been looking at all the aging spectrum. So weak muscles, you look into the muscles. The top, human muscles have 30,000 genes, and the top 100 that will light up in a frail, weak, sedentary person are all mitochondria. And the same goes for a person with early dementia. If you look at their brain, and everything is linked to poor autophagy and poor mitochondrial function. So these are the hallmarks that and we're still studying what is that first trigger. And I believe, and I touched upon that, I believe it's really the damaged mitochondria that are causing inflammation in the brain and the muscle and the whole body. Now, what else leads to all this sort of, it's really I call it poly sort of etiology. The poor diet, of course, the poor sleep, the stress we have in our daily life, the most of us have moved from, working in the outdoors to sitting 90% of the time in our work. And so really the sedentary lifestyle, these are all killers of mitochondria.
Yeah, the energy we put in is the energy we get out, right? And then if we're not moving the body, what we don't use, we lose. Not to use too many cliche terms, but it's so true, isn't it? The basic principles always remain with all of this. So what else are we doing other than sedentary life, that is having a negative impact on our mitochondria, do you think?
A lot of our medicines, so we touched upon that, that we are taking for a lot of things, a lot of exposure to outside factors, and a lot of these viruses, and things like we've gone through in the last 5 years, everybody knows is COVID. People with long COVID, if you look at them, they have really fragmented, poor mitochondria, and just the gut microbiome changes. A lot of people who don't eat a high fiber, an antioxidant rich diet, they just have shot mitochondria, and we see that.
what happens at a cellular level when mitochondria aren't functioning properly? And, what are the early signs that someone might have, poor mitochondrial health?
Yeah, so let's talk. So I'm trained as a clinician. The first thing you would see in somebody where you would suspect mitochondrial dysfunction is they would just be fatigued all the time. Mitochondria are these batteries, so it'll be like your cell phone battery going dead, kind of, if I had to give that analogy. And most of these people would also have things like lack of focus and clarity, so like what we call brain fog, kind of, because mitochondria are everywhere in every cell type and every organ, and they're key to the metabolism. So these would be the top two things. And then a lot of people who exercise and then get impacted, whether through medicines or change in lifestyle with poor mitochondrial health, they will say, "Oh, doc, I was doing these exercises, but I just can't recover from my exercise properly." So that's kind of the broad spectrum symptomatology that people will have. And in terms of a life cycle of mitochondria, the life cycle of a mitochondria starts with a very healthy mitochondria that accumulates stress and damage as we age. And there's always sort of a balance between the good and the bad mitochondria. And as we age, the balance just shifts towards having more bad-looking mitochondria.
One thing I heard once, and I'd love your take on this, was that cyanide instantly kills our mitochondria, which is why people drop dead almost immediately. It literally rips the cord. And I think is it from oxygen that gets to the mitochondria, which is why the batteries shut down because of a lack of oxygen almost immediately. So it's actually very interesting, because I heard someone else say the other week that our blood flows around our body, but it can't possibly get oxygen to every single part of it that easily just from blood flow, that it needs to be something else in terms of, the electric current from the water and minerals in our for our cells, and that it's powering the mitochondria even in the farthest parts of our bodies away from our heart. So it's interesting that if you take cyanide, how it instantly cuts that and kills the mitochondria, and then you drop dead. So, I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the biggest mitochondrial toxin, and so it basically short circuits the whole grid and the whole, mitochondria. If you actually look inside a cell, these are not one; there are thousands of them, and they're like a grid. It's like a power grid, that powers all the electricity in a big city, and so it just hits the entire machinery in one go. Usually aging will hit it one by one, so you always have a reservoir that you can replenish or rebuild, but cyanide, drugs like cyanide will just short circuit thousands of mitochondria at the same time.
Yeah, it's amazing when you know that there's an off switch of what mitochondria do. A lot of people say, well, I don't know if I believe in these little batteries in our cells everywhere and how important they are to optimize. But when you have something that can instantly switch them off, such as cyanide, and everyone, I would like to think most people know what it does. It's amazing to think this is how powerful they are for our energy utilization. So it's really interesting that my fatigue came after having ciprofloxacin, and my mitochondria before that seemed to be perfect. And I've heard many cases of this, as you said, floxies. So anyone that's had ciprofloxacin and is knackered afterwards, I would recommend you Google floxies and have a look into that whole go down that rabbit hole, because it's a pretty interesting one. So what can someone actually do about improving mitochondrial health? And have you got an actionable guide? Because there's a few things that I do, which one of them obviously is Urolithin A, and I like hydrogen water, which I always carry this bottle around with me, and a few other things. But I'd love to hear what you would recommend to someone.
Yeah, I would say if I look at, I'm a evidence-based person, so I'm a trialist and a doctor, and I think the best data exists for today for two interventions. One is regular exercise. So, even if you're not those half marathon running types, just walk 30 minutes, 3-4 times a week, gets your mitochondria going. That's the number one thing you should be doing. The second thing is not to overeat. That stresses the mitochondria like crazy, and we are seeing it, in all the overweight obesity crisis out there. We're seeing that people who are metabolically impaired or diabetic, they have poor mitochondria. So probably things like intermittent fasting or doing this sort of 16 hours of fasting and eating in an 8-hour window. These things are very good for your mitochondria to recover. Sleep, I believe this is a very under-researched area, how certain circadian rhythms are controlled, how sleep patterns are controlled, and they boost mitochondrial health. And then really supplementation. I think this should be the sort of the foundation of kind of maintaining whatever you're doing for your mitochondrial health is that advanced nutrients like Urolithin A or NAD supplementation, or things like even CoQ10 and creatine. These help mitochondria.
Mm. Yeah, actually, creatine's a big favorite for me as well, actually. And I mean, I used to hear it like thinking about the bro science of creatine. And everyone's like, yeah, you've got to have this if you're trying to bulk. But when I started looking into it deeper, and in fact, my friend Simland, I'm sure you probably heard of Sim, but he went into the details actually that got me going down the rabbit hole further, is how creatine works at the kind of the end process of methylation. And being an undermethylator myself, it helps bypass, or should I say, helps assist the whole methylation process, which is detoxification and energy production. And so it's really good supplement. And in fact, I recorded with JJ Virgin a few months ago, and she was discussing how bloody amazing creatine is, especially for women's health, their hormones and energy production. So it's interesting that you mentioned the creatine one. So it's a big favorite. And even though it's like, I think it's the second most studied supplement there's ever been after vitamin C. I think I'm correct in saying. And Ollie, the producer, you can check on that for me if that's okay while we're recording. The other thing is that on the exercise front, when I go back to my most fatigued part of life, when I really didn't have the energy at one point to hold up an umbrella, it was really like my arm was that's the extreme of what it was. Working out was probably the last thing on my mind. I was just literally trying to get through every day. So I think there's an area of serious energy deficit where your body is missing some fundamental building blocks, and then getting to a level of where your body is operating better and then pushing yourself and working out. Because I think I was always in energy conservation mode, but then as a result, I wasn't pushing myself and therefore wasn't adapting my body to actually dealing with more stress by working out and walking and stretching and things like that. So it's very interesting that you raise these points first before Urolithin A. Yes, Ollie confirms that creatine is one of the most extensively studied dietary supplements in the world, and rightly so. I mean, it really is fantastic. And in fact, JJ was talking about creatine, I think is it creatine HCl?
Which is the more bioavailable form.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can use like a fifth of the amount, which is fantastic. Hey guys, if you haven't heard, the Paleo Revival is here. This April in Austin, Texas, the tribe is getting back together again at the Health Optimization Summit. Learn how 35 industry legends like Gary Brecker, Mark Sisson, Ben Greenfield, JJ Virgin, and more optimize their health, and how you can too. Spend the weekend surrounded by ancestral wisdom, exploring cutting-edge health tech, and connecting with a tribe that makes you feel, like family. Austin, this is long overdue, but the wait is finally over. Get your ticket today at hosummit.com/Austin. You say that you're obviously evidence-based medicine, which is fantastic because there's so many influencers or authors that really aren't. And they talk about hyperbole or, hearsay stuff. So it's really nice to speak to, someone that is evidence-based. And moving on to that, is this like you're the chief medical officer over at Timeline Nutrition, where you work predominantly with plant-derived compound Urolithin A, which actually I've got it with me here, which I'm going to ask you about in a second. But Urolithin A, I've actually been taking these sachets, and those of you that are watching on YouTube can see that this sachet is blooming amazing tasting, actually. And I put it into my smoothies or drinks, whatever it may be. And in fact, Timeline do a whey protein powder, which you guys gave me a way back. And I put one of these sachets in with it as well for a double hit. It tastes so good. It's fantastic. But then, I think it was about a year ago, after using the sachets and carrying them with me everywhere for good 3, 4, 5 years, I guess, before COVID, I got sent this tub of them with the capsules. So now it's much easier to travel or not. You have to use the powder every day. So it's nice to mix it up a bit. Can you tell us a bit more, about Urolithin A, and how can we get it from our diets before we start taking, a supplement?
So urolithin A is a postbiotic. Okay, what does that mean? Postbiotic is basically a molecule made by the gut microbiome that is beneficial to the host, which is the humans. Now, where is it coming from? So in our diets, think about everything a superfood or all the superfoods: pomegranates, berries, pecans, walnuts, all kinds of nuts. These superfoods or fruits have antioxidants that we call polyphenols, and they're all enriched in a certain class of these antioxidants called L-argitannins. Now, for long, people thought it was these polyphenols and antioxidants that were really promoting the health that you were getting from these sort of superfoods that are, prevalent in Mediterranean diets and all the good diets. And they thought that all the byproducts of the gut metabolism, that is, basically these are complex compounds that the gut microbiome will then digest and release smaller molecules. And urolithin A is one of them. And so for a long time, it was thought that this was a metabolic waste product until we started screening. And in a pomegranate, for example, there are thousands of natural compounds, and we found none of them did the job. And it was really this metabolic postbiotic that was having these remarkable effects on mitochondria.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's funny, actually. It was, I think it was JJ Virgin herself, actually, that mentioned it when we were at the Health Optimization Summit last year. She said, yeah, after traveling or jet lag or whatever, I always have a MitoPure from Timeline. And it's actually fantastic that everyone seems to associate it with better energy and ongoing. And if you, obviously, any of you that don't know who JJ is, Google her and you see how bloody fantastic she looks for her age. It is really awesome. And so, when obviously I've been using it for years, but it was really nice, a little bit of confirmation that, it really does work. So how extensively has it been studied?
So we've been at it studying for almost 15 years. We started, as I mentioned, with the library of 4,000 compounds that are found in pomegranates and berries and nuts. And it took us about 3 years. We went harnessing pomegranates from every country in the world that was producing pomegranates. And we were really studying them deeply until we had this eureka moment where, working with a top mitochondrial professor who studies longevity pathways, he kind of figured it out that it was urolithin A that was having a 40% improvement in sort of extending lifespan in the smaller species where you start all the aging longevity research. And from there, we just built it up.
So 40% improvement in mitochondrial function on smaller species.
Yeah, so 40% improvement in mitochondrial function that resulted in just these worms and mice being more endurant and having a 40% longer health span and lifespan.
That is pretty fantastic. It's really fantastic. 40% is, and it's significant as well. It's not like when you look at some of these pharmaceuticals where they're like, oh yes, it has a 3.4% improvement in XYZ for 10 people out of 50 or something or other. So 40% is pretty significant. So what are the health benefits do people see from using urolithin A, and how quickly does it take to be noticeable?
Yeah, so we've studied this over the last probably 10 years in multiple placebo-controlled randomized clinical studies in different populations: older adults, middle-aged adults, and now even athletes. And it takes about a month to hit the mitochondrial life cycle. So now you're cleaning the bad mitochondria out, and this is a process that is called autophagy of the mitochondria, aka mitophagy, and that triggers the renewal and recycling into healthier mitochondria. And so 1 month to see the mitochondrial renewal, and about 2 months is when people really, in these clinical studies, start seeing impacts on things like VO2 max, which is another marker of aerobic capacity. And then about 4 months in, people start telling us about how great their recovery is and their muscle strength is.
Interesting. So I just want to touch on, autophagy and mitophagy very quickly, because they're two words that get used, or I say autophagy is used a lot, mitophagy a lot less, I would say. But autophagy, I always describe it as basically your cells having a clear out, a spring clean, so to speak, so that the renewal of clearing out of the dead ones and replacing with good ones. And I think if you could confirm that mitophagy is basically the same, but from the mitochondria, clearing out the dead rubbish battery cells that need replacing and generating new ones.
Absolutely. It's what I call the Pac-Man of process of cells, if you've ever played that game.
I love it. That's perfect. It's a perfect description. Love it. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
No. So it's really autophagy targeted or Pac-Man process targeted to mitochondria that are damaged, and they put out this "eat me" signal on their surface, and that's how damaged mitochondria get cleaned out.
I did hear that, urolithin A is produced in the gut, and if your gut isn't optimal, then your urolithin A won't be sufficient, and therefore your mitochondria won't be as efficient, and therefore your energy won't be so good, which kind of ties into the whole ciprofloxacin, antibiotics making you feel tired and whatnot. So, I guess there's the whole gut optimization element in this, but how much, on the assumption I have an okay gut, how much pomegranate or equivalents would I need to eat to be able to get a decent amount of urolithin A, do you think?
So we've done this trial, actually, and we've gone around the world in different cultures. I've gone to France, Italy, US, Canada, my country of origin, India, and I've really looked at the gut microbiome and the variability. So to answer your first question, how many pomegranates? You'll need to drink about 6 glasses of pomegranate juice, pure pomegranate juice, which is about 20 to 25 pomegranates crushed together. So that's a lot of hard work every day, and it's a lot of sugar also coming to you.
It's a lot. It's a heavy drink as well, isn't it? I mean, I buy pomegranate juice and I have probably, let's say 150 milliliters a day anyway, just because I love it. But it's so dense. It's almost like drinking blood. So if you had to drink that much versus one sachet, it's that's pretty crazy actually. So, I presume because gut health and mitochondrial health and are so tightly linked, and a lot of people listening to this probably have got suboptimal guts if they've ever had antibiotics in the past, or if they eat processed foods, or blah 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 blah. You might want to look at optimizing that, and obviously in the meantime supplementing accordingly if you are fatigued or if you want to improve your longevity. So can you tell us a bit more about this connection with the mitochondria and the gut microbiome, and how postbiotics support mitochondrial function and overall cellular health?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned I've looked at different cultures and different regions of the world. The French and the Italians, where they're eating fresh from the farm, I've gone in and sequenced their gut microbiome. These folks have a very rich and diverse gut microbiome that is all the good bacterial species in our gut are thriving there. And so if they are taking these berries and nuts and pomegranates, they naturally make urolithin A. And I see about 30-40% people in real life making urolithin A. Now, I go to the US, and you mentioned processed food, the percentage drops to about 10-12%. So that's 1 out of 10 individuals is making it, but the rest are not. Mm-hmm. And I can retrain the gut by giving them fiber and regular exposure to pomegranate, and I still can boost it beyond 30-40%. So the majority of the adult world is exposed to the benefits of this molecule. And I recently did a study in India where antibiotic usage is just rampant, and the incidence of what I call blessed people who are making urolithin A is about 5%. So the gut it is very closely linked to the human health, and it's very closely linked to mitochondrial health.
Have you ever tested a carnivore's gut or mitochondrial function or urolithin A levels or anything like that?
Great question, and we probably have the data and can go back to it now that you gave me this idea. But we do take dietary history, so that's an easy one to figure out. But I haven't taken a closer look.
I would love to find out a bit more about that, because the reason why is I shared out a post on Instagram, good old Instagram, a few days ago, and it was all about why carnivores have got it wrong in terms of fiber, and why you should actually have more fiber. And I had many carnivores saying, you don't need fiber, you can do without, it can move through your gut without it. But the thing is, I think I went full carnivore. It must have been about 12, 18 months, maybe even more. And as a gut reset, it was the best thing that I could have ever done, actually. I'd had high arabinose and various fungal markers for many years because of my antibiotic use. And I needed to use fluconazole or nystatin and things on and off for a long time. However, when I went carnivore, I tested afterwards and every single yeast marker, fungal marker, had gone back into range. And I tried this with everything under the sun. So coming out of carnivore was fantastic because, it reset my body in a way that supplements and things couldn't. So I guess I starved out all of the things that were eating off as sugars. However, when I started adding plants back in, I started bloating and whatnot. And, obviously passing a lot of wind, which is funny when my girlfriend's not around, but not funny when you have a partner. And I noticed that my gut couldn't handle plants. But after a period of time of adding in the right fibers slowly, bit by bit by bit, my gut actually got much better. And my stools went from being, suboptimal before carnivore, okay during carnivore, but a bit loose. And then after adding plants back in after carnivore, which included some of the fibers, my gut actually rebalanced and was a lot better for it. But I think, the whole carnivore thing seems to starve out so much of your gut bacteria and they're not flourishing because they don't have enough fibers and things. So it'd be really interesting to see the data on, where carnivores' guts actually are or where their urolithin A levels are specifically, because, while it's fueling your body, it might not be fueling it completely.
No, that's a great idea. And so I have developed a test actually that can tell you if you are one of those blessed natural UA producers or not. And it's a very simple test. You prick your finger, put a few drops of blood, and drink a glass of pomegranate juice that we will send with the diagnostic kit. And then you can actually then take one of those sachets, which is in the kit that you were showing, and see that. Because I think that's what's missing in the nutrition field is we all taking omega-3s and vitamin C's, but we don't know where it goes and if you really need to supplement.
Interesting. Yeah, actually, Kate Shanahan said yesterday, she said, amazingly, like when you supplement with omega-3, let's say you have, 3,000 milligrams or whatever, how much of it actually reaches your cells? She said probably less than 10%. And if it's oxidized or if it's poor quality, then, not even that. So it's actually, this is one thing I love about biohacking, and it obviously gets a lot of pushback. While I call it health optimization these days, not biohacking, it is the quantitative side of things, even if it's a, one person experiment of what works for you. I really love this. So can people get hold of this kit? And I'm saying people, me, yes, please. No, but, jokes aside, can people get their hands on one of these kits to see their urolithin A levels?
So this is still not commercial yet, but it's wrapped up as sort of in a prototype in a clinical study, and people can sign up and they can get the kit delivered in the front of the home and they can try it.
Is there also a test that you can do to check your general mitochondrial function to see that it's performing well?
So this is the toughest question because believe it or not, to study mitochondria, which are really micro organelles inside there are thousands of them inside a cell, you really need very high resolution techniques. So I've gone and done about 1,000 muscle biopsies to look at the mitochondrial health, and we use things like electron microscopy just to drill in, and we can see the shape and the structure of the mitochondria. But that's not ready for prime time, especially in a medical doctor's office. So we've been working a couple of fronts, 3 fronts actually. One is to look at your mitochondrial health through the blood cells, because the blood cells, the immune cells, have mitochondria, and their health predicts overall, not just whole body health, but also the mitochondrial health of the body. And so that we are progressing, and we just have a study hopefully coming out soon showing that taking urolithin A improved the mitochondrial health of the immune cells. And, it's just a little blood draw that I can tell you how good your mitochondrial health is. And then I'm working with another company spun out of UC San Diego called MeScreen that has developed a kit to give you your mitochondrial health score. And third, I believe, is really looking at sort of your biological age, which is a de facto marker of how your cells age.
So do you need a test, or should you just be able to tell in any other ways if it's good or not?
Well, right now, the way we test it in a clinical study would be to make people exercise, and people just keep doing the exercise 20% longer. And that's how, we know that the urolithin A is working because people have more energy and they can do a leg press 20% longer, or we'll measure things like inflammation markers. There's a very close connect. And And that is something you can do very quickly. You can go to your doctor's office and look at something called C-reactive protein, which is a biomarker of your whole body inflammation. And in every trial, we see that going down.
I absolutely love that you mentioned CRP, actually, because it came up yesterday with Dr. Kate Shanahan. I mention her again just because it's so relevant. It's so funny how the universe happens sometimes where things are in parallel. But, you know, CRP has been a good marker for me for some time. And also ESR is something that I've been obviously looking into recently. So 2 inflammation markers that, you know, have some overlap. And in fact, I would love to know whether or not you have any data on ESR and urolithin A, or if you've done any work in the ESR area with inflammation specifically.
No, we haven't. We've looked at hemoglobin mass and things like this, but not really ESR. Another third idea that we see being impacted is the ratio of your immune cells, so lymphocytes to monocytes. So as you age or you're inflamed, you will switch to monocytes more and lymphocytes less. These are really immune cells that any doctor's office can quantify. And if you have good health, you'll have more lymphocytes.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the reason why I mentioned I'm so interested in the ESR and obviously CRP is because obviously for those that are listening, the CRP is inflammation, usually chronic inflammation from infections or the body dealing with something. ESR has some overlap in terms of inflammation levels. And there's actually a device technology that's actually at the Health Optimization Summit in Austin in April 12th and 13th. Another cheeky little plug for the summit that's happening, which is you do a finger prick test at home, and you put it onto a tiny little pipette and drop it into a little machine, and it tests your ESR in real time. And it stands for, I can never pronounce it, erythrocyte sedentary rate.
Sedimentation rate.
Thank you. Yeah. And basically it looks at how fast your blood settles. And so this device that you have at home, so it's an at-home real-time test. You test your blood, looks at the ESR, and then emails you the results from the device. It's really fantastic, actually. And the guy that invented it, he said, oh yeah, my levels have been this long for so long. And I was like, well, have you tried grounding? Because obviously that's a massive reduction in, inflammation, giving our bodies free electrons to help reduce inflammation and improve mitochondrial health as well. And he messaged me after testing. He said, this is the biggest shift I've ever seen in my ESR just from grounding. So, it makes me think, maybe I should be going without my MitoPure for a month and then testing my ESR on a daily basis and add it in and see if there's a curve of improvement in ESR. I know grounding does for sure, because I've actually seen it on live blood cell, red blood cell analysis under dark field microscopy. It was before grounding and after grounding. And there's a few images going around on Instagram and the internet of before and after grounding where your red blood cells are clumped together before and then equidistant after. I've actually done this on myself when I flew to Vegas in 2022. On the first test, my red blood cells were clumped together, and on the second test after grounding, and I'd been on a 11-hour flight, they actually were equidistant, and they said, wow, you can see you optimize your body. So it's really interesting to see how this all ties in, and if I'm able to measure it with the ESR test. I mean, what do you typically see with CRP from what you've tested?
Oh gosh, CRP. Every older adult I look at is super inflamed. So aging is a big stressor. In fact, this is a term we call inflammaging. Now, every overweight 40-year-old, 50-year-old I see in clinics or in trials, it is inflamed. So metabolic impairment is a stressor for increasing CRP. And surprisingly, in all the research we're now doing on athletes, which are really elite runners, and for sure they have their muscle performance is at the peak of human performance, but sometimes overtraining is inducing inflammation in these athletes, and I see CRP being very high. So what we see is that urolithin A is able to decrease by about a factor of 1/3 the levels of CRP. So somebody at 3 and above, CRP is going down to like 1 or 2.
That's beautiful. I mean, I really love the CRP marker, actually. I really do. So it's really interesting because I've got some stats here. from my research, and it's just like muscle endurance improvement, in a randomized clinical trial involving older adults aged 65 to 90, participants who received 1,000 milligrams of urolithin A a day for 4 months exhibited significant enhancement in muscle endurance. Specifically, there was an increase in the number of muscle contractions until fatigue in both hand and leg muscles compared to the placebo group. I mean, you know, the only thing that I've ever really experienced this with was a specific amino acid in the morning when I wake before my gym workout. And I find that I have significant improvement in, you know, my muscle utilization. So it's interesting that, you know, urolithin A also ties into this. It's like, you know, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's really hitting on what I call the bioenergetics of the muscle, right? So you as I mentioned, the mitochondria are really like this grid, and your muscle cells are getting more powered up, and they can keep the repeatability of an exercise or of a certain action going. And when we see things like muscle contractility also improved with the urolithin A intake over a long time. So I think it's really not boosting muscle mass that things like protein and amino acid probably are doing, but it's really boosting the muscle quality, and combining it with things like leucine or high protein supplementation is really the absolute win for muscles.
So when are you going to bring out an amino acid product with some some mitophagy in it? That's the question. I would be all over that.
Well, I think the first candidate is really creatine, because I think there's so much synergy there in the different pathways, and we actually have done experiments on muscle cells, and we see, you know, things like magnesium, creatine really complementing the action of urolithin A.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, magnesium is always a favorite. And I think actually one of the things I noticed from the ciprofloxacin or the floxy movement was everyone seemed to, that had the worst effects from ciprofloxacin actually had serious magnesium deficiencies when tested. And the people that had the biggest tendinitis or tendons that absolutely ruptured were the ones that were deficient in magnesium. And so when I started digging down the hole in terms of magnesium, it's involved in 300 to 400 different processes in the body, which include a lot of energy production ones. So it seems, obviously the tie-in with urolithin A, magnesium, creatine, it seems like an obvious win, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned inflammaging, and there's obviously there's glycanage, which does this. And one thing that I've noticed with this, and it is one of my go-to tests actually, which I like to do every year, especially because it gives me a result of 21 or 22 every year, which is half my chronological age, which is fantastic. But one thing I notice is, like you said, that athletes that perform too much or work too hard have excess inflammation. And I notice some pro athletes or pro bodybuilders that actually have, you know, 70-year-old results in their tests, even though they're doing everything else beautifully. Whereas I would say, you know, I work out 3 times a week. I don't do a lot of cardio, but I do get my heart rate up. I do like to lift heavy because I'm such a skinny little thing. I need to really push it hard. But the point is my inflammaging markers are all super low, whereas people that are probably looking like they're better physically fit have older aging. So, I mean, do you think this is just down from them pushing their body too hard in some areas, and therefore it's showing inflammaging markers and more inflammation in general?
Yeah, I think this is a very upcoming area of research in sort of the cellular health field. Is really this crosstalk of inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. So I think overtraining induces, and this is debatable, but this is sort of my hypothesis, that overtraining causes muscle damage and, to a certain extent, mitochondrial damage. And whenever mitochondria get damaged, they become leaky. So they leak out these fragments of mitochondria that are seen as stressors by the immune cells that get then inflamed and start a whole immune response going. And so that's where I think the two pathways merge very quickly, and that's why you see a lot of athletes, a lot of old people who are just inflamed because their mitochondria are so damaged and leaky, and there are probably other factors that are causing.
Yeah, that's an area I'm really interested in keeping an eye on specifically, actually, and see. I mean, you mentioned cellular health and things like that. Have you had much to do with metabolomics tests and things like that? Because obviously they're becoming more and more popular in the retail, for retail customers these days, and practitioners seem to be recommending metabolomics tests. One that I do is the NutriVal from Genova, which is it's expensive, but I think to look at what the expression of the cells are is fantastic with this test. I mean, have you had much to do with these metabolomics tests?
Yeah, we've embraced this technology for the last 10 years in all our randomized trials.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we pick up everything linked to fuel utilization, everything linked to energy metabolism in these. And there are about 1,000 of these metabolites, or you can go with focused panels of these metabolites. We do something with a company in the US called Metabolon that is really one of the research leaders in this field. And we pick up things like metabolites linked to fatty acid oxidation, which, just for your listeners, is how you burn fat, and when your mitochondria are shut, you don't burn fat and very well, and you just accumulate these metabolites. And going on Urolithin A in our participants, what we see is really normalization of these metabolites to a very normal level. And so, yes, there are patterns we pick up.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that you talk about that, about the fat utilization. In fact, when I went high fat, high protein, low carb, on my test, it showed I had lipid peroxidation, and it was really, really bad. In fact, it's like I had to, I was eating bacon with butter and like eggs in butter and doing everything that the keto tribe said you should be doing. In fact, I mean, it was a test, but it just showed that I was just so bad from it. It's actually incredible. But yeah, back to the metabolomics test. I mean, I think, for the guys listening, is actually my favorite of all tests, although because it is quite expensive, especially in the UK, I think it's about £500 or £600, which is, $700 or $800. But it really does look at, what's going on the cellular level from the cell expression. And for instance, one of the things I like about the test that I do from Genova specifically was that they say how the cell is expressing and what your deficiency looks like and what you can be supplementing with to help fill that deficiency. And the interesting thing was it showed for me that my methylation status was okay, but not optimal. Whereas my genes show that my methylation needs extra work. But because I'd been supplementing with B12, methylfolate, trimethylglycine, and I'd been eating, the right amount of meat from what my genes need, it actually showed that the output of my methylation was okay. However, I needed a lot more vitamin C. So it's really interesting to see on a cellular level what your body needs. I love this. So I'm really, really happy that you've been using it for 10 years when, really, I mean, it's only been publicly available pretty much, I think, since 2018 or 19 now. So you mentioned exercise improving mitochondrial health, and high-intensity interval training has been shown to increase mitochondrial capacity by 49% in young people and up to 69% in older adults, which is nothing short of bloody fantastic. But how does physical activity impact mitochondrial health? And are certain types of exercise more beneficial than others?
Yeah, so there are 3 different strategies you can improve mitochondrial health. One is what in the field we call something called biogenesis. Now, sounds a nerdy term, but biogenesis really means creation of new mitochondria. So, a cell has a certain limited real estate. If you have space and you're doing the right things, exercise is the biggest stimulant of this pathway called biogenesis. So you're creating your mitochondria, young, healthy, creating more energy. Second is you can take the pool of your healthy mitochondria inside your cells and get them to work even more efficiently and make better energy. That's where things like creatine, L-carnitine, CoQ10 kind of augment a lot of the effects of exercise or things like fasting. And the third we've already talked about is mitophagy. So if there's no real estate, if you're, all the garbage is filling your cells with damaged mitochondria, you really can't get anything to be better. So you clean out the waste, and then you get things like exercise. And we see people who exercise always come back to me and say things like Urolithin A are, helping them.
Again, when you think about lymphatic flow and circulation and oxygenation, it's like if you're not moving your body enough, you're not going to be helping to move it all and clear this stuff out, isn't it? It's right. It's like, for instance, lymphatic flow is so important, I think, in all of this. And I think this is where part of exercise comes in. For instance, I remember talking to one of our speakers once, and he was doing Tai Chi outside the venue and standing there and circling his arms and things like that. And I was like, what? It looks like you're on the front of the Titanic. What are you doing? And he said, actually, I'm just stimulating lymphatic flow. He said, because it's so important for detoxification. He said, you can take all the supplements in the hall there, but unless you're moving your body and getting the lymph flowing and oxygen, blood pumping and oxygen around your body, there's no point doing anything else. So I think, I'd say that to the listeners, that if you don't at least walk 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day and don't do any stretching and don't do the gym, taking any supplement is a waste of time. You want to do the 80% first. And what we're talking about here are, the 20% refinement to make you feel absolutely incredible. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, those two things, exercise and watching what you're eating, are the absolute pillars of your health. And then at the base is these 20%, as you said. The foundation is really these sort of advanced supplementation strategies.
Now, one thing that I have a love-hate relationship with London. It is an amazing city, and I love my home here. However, air pollution is a problem. And I have Jasper air filtering system, or should I say air filters throughout the house. Actually, I have 3 of them running at all times, just because I'm so conscious of it. And even though I'm right next to the river where the air is cleaner than everywhere else, it's still not, like being in Portugal on the beach. And I'm very conscious about, obviously if we breathe in cigarettes or whatever, we feel it almost immediately. So for instance, if someone that would smoke pot or whatever, would get high very quickly because it hits our body so fast. Same with pollution over a period of time. Even if it's 10%, polluted or whatever, it's going to impact on mitochondrial health. And so air filtering is such an important piece in all of this, I think. And it's apparently air pollution and environmental toxins is responsible for up to 4 million premature deaths every year and linked to massive oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. So beyond diet, exercise, gut health, what's some of the other lifestyle or environmental factors that are areas that stress our mitochondria?
Well, I think you pointed out correctly. So we've been studying the role of things like pollution and also areas where there's a lot of harmful UV rays coming as well, and really seeing beyond just muscle and other cell types, what is it doing for things like the mitochondria and the skin? And we see that a lot of these pollutants and irritants are really having a detrimental impact on the mitochondria of the skin cells, for example. And so these are definitely part of the equation. The other ones is the temperature. Mitochondria are very sensitive to temperature. In fact, they do better and function better in colder climates, and they're also sensitive and reactive to certain wavelengths of light. And so that's why you'll hear a lot of people talk about red light therapy to improve mitochondrial health, or take cold plunges although there is evidence also for sauna, but we have seen evidence that people living in tropical, hot, humid climates and polluted have lower mitochondrial function.
I'm really interested in, brain health or cognitive performance. And, something that, as you're saying this, and I'm just thinking, when I was most fatigued, I had massive brain fog. And, I hate to use that term brain fog, but it is such a good description. It's an abstract for a very complicated puzzle. One thing that makes me think is, obviously, our brain being, I think it's 60% fat-based, something like that, and a large part water as well, which is obviously good for the electrical part of our body. Now, if our gut isn't optimal and we're not producing enough urolithin A, for instance, could that mean that we're not actually digesting and utilizing the fats in our diet properly as well, on the assumption that our gut isn't optimal, and therefore our brain chemistry isn't good? One, because of the deficiency in urolithin A, 2, because we're not utilizing fats potentially correctly. And then also, on top of that, not necessarily breaking down proteins into the right amino acids and neurotransmitters. I mean, so I guess where I'm going with this is, how important is urolithin A and mitochondrial health in terms of brain performance?
Yeah, all great questions, and this is probably the biggest area of research we are doing today, and that you'll probably get to hear. I mean, the word research is two words: re and search. So you always need to go back and do more and study more things. The gut, there's something which I call the gut-brain axis. So a lot of times, a lot of neurodegenerative disease start in the gut. A lot of Parkinson's disease patients will come to you with diarrhea and constipation and really gut problems, and that's how it all starts. It all starts in there's almost like a second gut, a second brain in the gut, and so what we see, and so we got interested in this space, and clearly we know that mitochondrial health and brain health and cognitive health is linked. A lot of top labs in the U.S. picked up our research on Urolithin A and mitophagy, and they found that in people with dementia and Alzheimer's, the number one pathway that is shot is mitophagy and autophagy. And so they ran a library of thousands of compounds, much like we did 10 years back, and they found that Urolithin A was the one that was actually the most potent at rewiring the mitochondrial machinery, neurons, and dampening what we call neuroinflammation. And so we are doing this trial. Now, being a nutrition company, you can't go and do a trial in Alzheimer's because the regulatory bodies will say this is a drug trial. So we actually have found a cohort of 40, 50-year-olds who have sleep problems, what we call REM sleep problems. And that cohort, if you follow them up, it's been well studied, that 95% of them 20 years out will have some sort of neurodegeneration. So we are picking up problems in brain energy metabolism early on and trying to see if we can halt the progression with Urolithin A supplementation. So that's the studies we are doing today.
That's super exciting. I mean, really, that's bringing preventative health, because it's like looking at markers that might be 20 years ahead of their time and optimizing that. I think that's incredible. I mean, I'm very, very happy to hear that, because I think we are starting to, especially with the whole, let's say, the beginning of the MAHA movement that's happening over in the States at the moment. I think there's a bit more awareness coming around this area in terms of moving from sick care to healthcare. But I think, they do go hand in hand,
Sure.
And I think, a lot of people in the alternative health space, we don't need pharmaceuticals. I think, they're complementary if used correctly. But I think the problem is the world has become so pharmaceutical based that we've lost touch with our original roots of, let's say, more basic compounds that we didn't know about, such as Urolithin A or some of the other things.
Yeah, they really go hand in hand. Just another example quickly is a lot of people who have cancer take immunotherapy, right? These are, and for many years, I mean, immunotherapy is very recent, about 5 years in clinical practice. But people who have still a good gut microbiome are responding better to immunotherapy, these cancer therapies. And so we are now collaborating and studying how something, a nutrition product like Urolithin A can even augment a standard immunotherapy response in these cancer patients.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, the immunotherapy thing is, I think, fantastic, because quite a lot of the time, when someone has cancer, for instance, they kill the immune system off even more with certain treatments. And, while I've got necessarily nothing against those contextually, I think one thing that happened with my grandfather as well. Actually, they say, the cancer treatment is fantastic and it clears X% of, initial cancers. But the thing is people often die from a secondary cancer because their immune system has been hit so hard. So, it deals with the initial purpose, which is where all the statistics go, saying, this person was, cured, but they don't look at the 5 or 10 year follow-up, where it actually says, well, did they actually get a secondary cancer that they might not have got had they not had something that kills their immune system off? So I love the immunotherapy aspect of where things are going. And it's you saying that we're only 5 years in. That is awesome, really awesome, because, I think if I think back to the first day I heard about methylation and optimizing your health based on your genetics and how far methylation's come and the microbiome since 2010, it's really exciting to think where this is going to be going. And I think, at some form, part of the whole longevity piece will be some form of immunotherapy just for longevity reasons, not when it's too late and you're having to clear up the mess. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to hear that coming from you, actually. So what other exciting projects are you currently working on that you're allowed to tell us about?
Well, obviously the unlocking sort of new benefits, mitochondria in every cell type. And again, as I mentioned, research is more in continuity. You have to keep building on the evidence. So hopefully what you'll see is the remarkable effects on the immune health and inflammation that we've talked about earlier come out soon. The brain is just fascinating. But just things like, how can we even hit something like metabolic health with this compound? I mean, right now there's this craze with all the GLP-1 and, these were anti-diabetic drugs that now become lifestyle drugs. And I believe as a clinician in 10, 20 years, there'll be the tsunami of all the side effects, which is all the muscle loss that accompanies the weight loss. And people, that when they stop these therapies after they've lost weight, the muscle really doesn't come back. So I think you will see accelerated sarcopenia, frailty in older adults in the next 10 years. And that's where, where we are trying to, back to your point, combine it with, can we combine certain studied nutritional therapies with these run-of-the-mill pharmaceutical therapies?
I love that you touched on that aspect. I know of several people in the space that are using it, and I personally think I don't think it's good for long-term health. I think there are applications for it for people that obviously can't adjust their life, but I think if it's just a lifestyle reason, I want to be thinner because I need to be on camera, for instance, I just think it's madness because we just don't know enough. And there's always, I don't think you can hack anything. And, while I call myself a biohacker, I don't think you can actually hack anything. There's not a shortcut. It needs to be done correctly. Sometimes there's more efficient ways of doing stuff, which is why I like the word optimization opposed to hacking. But anyway, so finally, is there a vision of the future regarding mitochondrial health research that drives you, motivates you, excites you, lights you up?
Yeah, so the number one is finding this holy grail. Everybody in the field is, can we find this one biomarker or set of biomarkers that is non-invasive, easy to implement in clinical practice, that everybody can track on a weekly, monthly basis their mitochondrial health? So I think that's the one where I am spending a lot of time, and that's the one that excites me. If we can crack that, that's great. The other is really sort of this adjunct approach to, can we combine things like Urolithin A, supplementation with certain other probiotics? I mean, I've been looking at the gut microbiome, and it seems like things like Akkermansia are enriched in people who are naturally blessed, who make things like, a lot of healthy gut postbiotics. And so are there ways we can combine certain nutritional regimens together? I think that would be another one. And then we talked about how can we add creatine and Urolithin A and other good stuff in one pill.
That's the thing. It's been amazing to chat with you today and pick your brain and ask you lots of exciting things. So I hope you've had as much fun as I have today. And thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I had great fun. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Health Optimization Podcast, and I'm Tim Gray. If you've enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. And don't miss the chance to join me and 35 speakers this April in Austin, Texas for the Health Optimization Summit. Tickets are available from hosummit.com/Austin. I cannot wait to get the Paleo Tribe back together again. See you next time, and remember, let's spread the health.